Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, and welcome to the Green Building Council's panel discussion on how we're going to build a better, healthier, greener Aotearoa, hopefully off the back of COVID-19 and all of the uncertainties and disruption that has caused. My name is Nadine Higgins. I'm going to be your facilitator today. I can see we still have people joining us because I believe it is a sellout crowd. So if you are just joining us, we will be getting underway over the next few minutes after just a couple of opening remarks. We're all pretty familiar now with working in this way from our own homes via webinar and whatever app you choose to use. And this has become our new normal. So I can imagine there are a few of you sitting at home today, still with your slippers on, but business from the waist up. I do apologize if you see any small animals run past the back of my shot, but that's another thing that we've all become used to over the past 7 weeks. And just as we've got used to it, we're about to move to level 2, and I don't know about you, but I have been hanging out to see a few more of my nearest and dearest, even if I can't yet give them a hug just at the minute. Obviously, COVID-19 has brought with it many challenges, and if you happen to have been locked down with one or more small children, you would say many, many challenges. But obviously, it also at a certain point brings with it some opportunity to decide how we do things afterwards. Do we return to business as usual as quickly as possible to get people back to work and back to normality? Or do we take a moment to think about it and try and do it with an eye to the future, perhaps more sustainably, perhaps with an eye of how we'd like to live rather than just how we lived before? I saw something the other day that I thought sort of hit the nail on the head, and I'm just going to paraphrase, but it acknowledged that, yep, lockdown has been a mental health challenge for many of us, but we shouldn't pretend that the hyper-connected world of long days and long commutes was some sort of mental health utopia, because it wasn't. So what is it that we want to go back to? The government has talked about shovel-ready projects, about plans to inject life back into an economy that has basically been on life support after undergoing something of a cardiac arrest. And of course, tomorrow, the government delivers its budget. We obviously don't know exactly what's going to be in it. We've had a few pre-budget announcements, although arguably perhaps fewer pre-budget announcements than we are used to in years gone by. But it is fair to say that it is unlikely to look anything like the encore to the wellbeing budget that they were perhaps expecting to deliver following that first wellbeing budget last year. So with so many demands on their funds, what is it that we should be focusing on, and in what order? What are the quick wins? What are some of the slow burns? What can we hope to achieve beyond a resuscitation of our ailing economy? Can we make it greener? Can we make it more sustainable, better to live in, more conducive to mental health? And what vision can we show about what sort of society we want to live in? So over the next hour or so, we're going to be speaking to our panel of experts about this at length. And as part of that discussion, we encourage your questions. If you haven't used GoToMeetings before, you should be seeing a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And toward the bottom of that panel, there's a section that says questions. And you can type your question there, and provided it's a good one, I will put it to our panel throughout our discussion. But before we get into the Q&A proper, the way things are going to work is we are going to hear a 2-minute pitch of sorts from each of our 4 panelists. We want to put them into approximately 120 seconds, so just a short time frame, the vision they have for Aotearoa in a year's time, which we can only really call the short term, I know. So hopefully none of them say mired in recession, even if that might be the truth. I guess what we're wanting is a vision for us to think big and think positive. So I'll get started by introducing those who are on our panel today. Shamubeel Eaqub is an economist at Sense Partners. He's an author, a media commentator. I've heard him sometimes be accused of being a bit bearish, but he's never afraid to poke the bear. Kia ora, Shamubeel.
Kia ora.
Tessa Meyer is the Corporate Responsibility Advisor at Panuku Development Auckland, and she was also the New Zealand Green Building Council's Future Thinker of the Year for 2020. So Tessa, I am hoping you can turn your forward-thinking mind to this panel discussion today. Good morning to you, afternoon to you.
Kia ora, thank you Nadine.
Also joining us is Kevin Hague, who is the Chief Executive of Forest and Bird, but of course also has that experience as a Member of Parliament for the Green Party for a number of years. Kia ora, Kevin.
Kia ora, Nadine.
And our final panellist, David Kennedy. He is the Chief Executive of Ngāi Tahu Property, which is the property development and investment arm of Ngāi Tahu Group. And David is also on the board of Panuku Development Auckland. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
So let's kick off with those 2-minute snapshots of New Zealand, Aotearoa in a year's time. Let's start with you, Shamubeel.
Thanks, Nadine. COVID-19 has completely changed my world because this is a once-in-a-100-year event. And you're absolutely right in that we're in this incredible recession, but I think this recession has really knocked us in terms of rethinking about our priorities. And the kinds of word games I play are, we've gone from talking about full employment to mass unemployment, from base rate thinking to first principles. Why do we do stuff? We go to the office for work versus now we want to go to the office to connect with people. We've talking about globalization differently to decoupling. 40 years of wisdom in just-in-time and efficiency to now talking about redundancy and resilience. These are positive things. We are talking about capitalism and socialism in a positive frame. We're talking about private versus public in the right ways. Except, of course, all the root issues that face our society have not changed, whether it's around housing, whether it's around inequality, poverty, climate change. Those issues are just as present as they were 6 weeks ago. If anything, the change in mindset is what gives us that opportunity to ask, is there a better way of doing things? In many ways, for me, the lockdown was the easy thing to do because the remedy, the answer was clear. As we come out of it, that's when the big questions would be asked. We chose to look after each other and stay home. But what happens when we start to come out? What do we unite behind in terms of the vision and the outcomes that we want for New Zealand? As I look to the future, we know there are many unknowns, but we know that the choices we make now is what's going to shape those outcomes. To be human is to make the choices. It's not about leaving everything to fate. My vision is that we choose to address those long-standing issues of climate and inequality and poverty in our country, which we know the solutions for, but we haven't had the courage or the true egalitarianism in our society to be able to deal with it. The budget is just one opportunity, but as citizens, the chance for us out of this incredible crisis is to band together as one nation.
Thank you, Shamubeel. That's so true that the lockdown might have been the easy bit, even though it had its difficulties, perhaps some of the harder stuff still to come. Tessa Meyer, let's head to you next on the Panuku Development Auckland. What's your vision of New Zealand in a year's time?
Kia ora tātou, and I absolutely resonate with what you've said, Shamubeel. I come at this not only as a sustainability professional, but also as a young person who is deeply concerned about the future of our planet. And I must admit, although this experience for us and the whole world has been devastating and it's been scary, I feel a great sense of hope and relief that there is this resounding, very widespread call to action that our economic recovery has to have climate resilience at its heart. And as a young person, I acknowledge that the debt that we take on in recovering, that we have to take on, will fall on my generation to pay back. So climate resilience is the #1 theme that I keep coming back to. And it's heartening to see work such as yours, Shamubeel, that shows that the green recovery is better for society. It provides us with multiple benefits. So I divert to you in terms of explaining the sort of economic benefits of climate resilience. There's 2 other themes that that come to mind as I muse about what Aotearoa could look like in a year's time. The first is equity. And I think that people need to be at the heart of what we do. We need to care deeply about our most vulnerable communities in Aotearoa, and our solutions need to be fair. And secondly, I think that we absolutely need to take cues from our tauranga Māori and really take leadership from the fact that Indigenous communities around the world know that our existence completely relies on a healthy balance between people and the environment. So I hope that our solutions are led by that genuinely. And yeah, Shamubeel, you're absolutely right. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity to put people and the planet first. And I'm under no illusion that it's going to be costly and it's going to be hard and we're going to disagree on what those solutions look like, but I hope that we have compassion and that we have courage to do what is right and use this opportunity really wisely.
You raise a great point there, Tessa, I guess around that intergenerational equity, that young people are going to make a lot of sacrifices and likely be carrying debt for quite some time in order to tackle this head on. So we can delve a little bit more into that in a few moments. Kevin Hague from Forest and Bird. Hasn't it been nice to hear the birds during lockdown?
Yeah, it sure has. I'm sitting here in Greymouth at my home, and I'm surrounded by bush, so I'm not seeing any more birds than usual. And actually, there aren't really more birds around. It's just people are more aware of them. And I guess one of my hopes is that as people are more aware of nature around them, and I guess more connected to nature, more understanding of just how much we need that natural world around us for our mental health and our physical well-being also, that as we move beyond this lockdown phase, that actually people will start to realize that much as we need nature, nature also needs us to protect it. Some people have heard me talking about these kinds of things before, you know, that we actually have set up our society and that part of our society that we call the economy in a way that extracts from both people and the natural world, you know, so nature is seen as raw materials or waste disposal. And we desperately need to turn around that relationship. One of my favorite authors is Bill McKibben, and one of his books, Deep Economy, which I highly recommend, is subtitled, "What's the economy even for?" And that way of constructing the economy is something that we own. That's a set of tools that we can use to achieve various goals, rather than being a force of nature in and of itself, I think is crucial. So let's retool the economy to actually deliver on our social and our environmental goals. And I guess that's my hope. You know, we have this opportunity, as Shamubeel's spoken about, to actually turn the oil tanker that we don't normally have. So let's take it.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Sounds like you're in an idyllic spot for lockdown. David Kennedy from Ngāi Tahu Property. What's your vision of New Zealand in a year's time?
Tēnā koutou, no tamaki makaurau aho ko David Kennedy aho, no reira tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to talk about using the C word. I'd like us to be cohesive. I think cohesion is something that we require to construct positive go-forwardness. Without cohesion, you have dissipated energy and dissipated understandings of what should be achieved. Another C word, I think, which is appropriate is community. I think communities need to or should take the opportunity to group together and so that we see micro as well as macro activities, which then can then blend in the middle to become the right ways forward and agreed ways forward. Just to continue on a theme, we obviously want a clean climate. and we need to think about all of the undertakings that we're doing in our everyday life, because we're spending so much more time in a different sort of everyday life, which is at home, and think about the way we go about our daily rituals and the impact that they have on the economy. But then as we return to wider groupings of interaction with people, how they affect the climate as well. And for me, who works in the property sector, how we undertake what we do and the partners that we choose to do those things with to ensure that they're done in the right way. The final C word, I think, is clear or clarity. And it's incredibly sometimes upsetting, sometimes frustrating, sometimes hilarious, how things that you think are clear are not clear. If the Prime Minister says you can take some safe exercise in your local area, I think I know what that means. But somebody thought it was okay to drive for 20 kilometres and go surfing. I mean, we end up needing more clarity than we sometimes get, even though we think things are clear. So yeah, my collection of C words is kind of where I'd like to see us be.
Thank you very much, David. Well, I'd just like to remind you that during the panel over the next just under an hour is open for you to participate in. So again, if you've joined us since our introduction, there is a panel on the right-hand side where you can input your questions. And if it's to a particular panelist, just please make that clear. Or if you're happy for us to throw it open to the floor, then that's fine too. So ask your questions, get involved, and we'll try and make this as much like being in the room with one another as we can. So I'm thinking that I might come back to Shamubeel to start, because I know, Shamubeel, that you will have done some thinking about how grim things might get from an economic perspective. And while Kevin said that quote from his favourite author, "What is the economy?" It is still the framework that we operate within, and will probably determine what resources we have available to us to invest in a recovery or a green recovery. So I'm wondering if you could give us your take on how dire things might get.
Start with the easy question, right? I don't know the answer, and nobody does. That's because this is completely unprecedented and out of there is no playbook for what's going on. What we know is that this is going to be the biggest thing in generations. So we are going to see a huge amount of destruction of businesses and jobs. The immediate priority for us should be to look after people, to make sure that the people who are affected by this incredible economic crisis, we look after their financial well-being, their mental well-being, and all of that kind of stuff. The government response is going to come in waves. There are 3 waves of responses. The first is the health response. Make sure that we protect lives. The next part is around livelihoods, which first comes with that initial kind of surge of unemployment. We've already seen 40,000 job losses in New Zealand. That's half as many job losses as we had in the entire GFC. So, there's quite a bit of welfare safety net stuff that we have to do in coming weeks and months. And then there is the stuff that we're here to talk about, the big thinking stuff. Where do we put our energy into to reflate and re-energize this economy? And Grant Robertson talked about it last week when he talked to the Wellington Chamber of Commerce, and he said, look, this is our once in a lifetime chance to reboot and change direction of the economy. And I think that's exactly right. We can all see that there were many ways, many things that we were doing in the way that we traveled, the way we consumed, the way we wasted. All of this stuff is not good for us, and it's not good for the economy. I don't know about you, but I saved half of my money in the last month, and I feel just fine. In fact, I feel quite happy. It won't be so good for many businesses, but I think it asks some serious questions in terms of which parts of the economy actually makes us happier and better people versus the ones that we just do because they're habit. So government's going to have to do some really serious thinking in terms of where do we put these precious resources, which are massive taxes and impositions on the generations now and the generations to come. Where will we put those resources? I think we're going to see a few things. One, there is a lot of deficits that we need to make up for. whether it's in health or education or welfare system. Those are areas that we have to invest in urgently. They won't give us recovery and growth, but we have to take this opportunity now to fix it. The real investments come from, a lot of it is around the physical world, where we have trapped in and baked in with the ways of doing things that are polluting and inefficient. So therein lies the challenge. There are lots of projects that are shovel ready that are of the old world. And yet the things that we actually want to do that's going to make our society better off, our people better off, and our economy greener and more sustainable in the future are the things that are not well thought out yet. So I can see that over the next little while, the response to the recession is partly going to stem from convenience. We will do things that are just in front of us, but it would be, I think, very sad if we didn't take this opportunity to also think about some of the other things that will start to change the supertanker. I think one of you mentioned that. So it's not a very good answer to your question, Nadine, in the sense that there are no black and white answers in this. We are in this incredible crisis where we're going to have to do lots of different things. As long as we are careful about understanding what outcomes we want and what values we are going to impose on them, I think we're going to make really good progress. New Zealand is in a much better position than almost the rest of the world. I feel very privileged to be here, and I think we can make some very good decisions as long as we work together and hold each other to account.
Maybe if I could, thank you for that, Shamubeel. Maybe if I could throw open to the whole panel, how do we get this cohesiveness and focusing on the things that are going to improve our lives versus the things that are just going to get things moving again and get people in jobs, any jobs, rather than jobs that might be ones that would lead us towards a more sustainable future? Because I guess there is a pressure when the government's weighing up its priority to just get things moving. So how do we get them to focus on the things that are more sustainable rather than the things that are just shovel ready, to use their terminology? Who would like to kick us off?
I'm happy to go if it's good. My tolerance for silence is not great, so. It's a really important question because of this phenomenon of path dependency. So yes, some decisions need to be made right now because we need to be able to ensure that people are able to return to receiving incomes, and that when that wage subsidy runs out, that people have jobs to do. So we need something for them to do. The risk is that the decisions we make at this stage then set the platform that shapes what subsequent stages look like as well. And the risk is, as Shamubeel said, that if something is shovel ready, it indicates that someone has been thinking about it already. And if they've been thinking about it already and are ready to go, most likely it is going to reflect old thinking. And that old thinking is the style of economy, the style of activity that is not what we want for the future. So we need to work with government right now to ensure that the decisions that they make tomorrow are ones that actually set us on the right path. And there's, literally the decisions they make tomorrow, billions and billions of dollars being sunk into something. Well, that something will shape the direction of the economy for the foreseeable future. So we need them to make the right decisions. We've been talking with government about how those shovel-ready decisions don't have to be building roads, and other hard infrastructure like that, reflecting that old economy. That instead you get richer jobs by putting those into environmental restoration projects, or something that's probably of interest to the audience today, things like upgrading the New Zealand housing stock, building good quality new houses, addressing that fundamental problem. The sort of basic rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we're currently not meeting. Those are better jobs, and they also put us in the right direction. And I've just one last thing, because I've been raving, but the last thing is, one of the things I thought that was great coming out of Christchurch was that project that got everyone in the community to be pitching their ideas. Now, unfortunately, I think the cart kind of went off the rails a bit after that, but I would love to see us as a nation doing that kind of project to agree on what our social and environmental goals are as a society, so that we're developing a consensus about some endpoints that we can aim for.
I'm wondering, Kevin, that given you say that these shovel-ready projects indicate something that's been thought about already, I think the definition is they have to be ready to go within the next 12 months. So presumably an awful lot of thought has gone into them with the thinking of pre-COVID times. So do you think we should just throw out this idea of shovel-ready, or is there still some merit in pursuing some projects that subscribe to pre-COVID thinking?
Well, look, I think what we need to do is to have maybe jobs ready projects rather than shovel ready, because shovel ready maybe conveys the wrong sense there, and for a very clear signal from government that the type of jobs ready projects that it wants to favour and weight are those that are restorative of nature and restorative of society and reductive of inequality. You know, so that there's a very clear lens that all of those projects are seen through. I guess, you know, the counter to that might be, well, maybe there aren't enough of those projects, you know, and therefore we have to employ people to build new motorways. I just don't accept that, because, you know, I've done some, you know, preliminary numbers myself, looking at the kinds of jobs that could be created in this new direction, and we absolutely can create the jobs that are better jobs that put us in the right direction. And that's what we should be doing.
I saw you there, Tessa, nodding away. What's your take on shovel ready and how we encourage a focus on things that are sustainable rather than that are just job creating?
Yeah, well, going back to the original question around how dire this is going to be, I accept that we're seeing this event, a pandemic, as a 1 in 100 year crisis, but I think we all agree as well that climate change is quite literally lapping at our shores, and that will be an economic crisis that will cause greater loss of jobs, loss of life, and it will be a crisis that is measured in decades, not years. So I am just extremely cognizant of the fact that what we decide today, to totally echo what you're saying, Kevin, the infrastructure that we invest in and the decisions that we make are going to serve us for decades to come. They will affect how we go about our lives. They will affect how we use resources. And yeah, I'm quite scared about what will get the green light in terms of these big, shiny new projects that do reflect old thinking. But I also think there was a lot of really good thinking that was happening before this, particularly looking at our public infrastructure, public space, cycling infrastructure, massive projects that are going to enable sustainable movement and are going to improve the public spaces that communities around New Zealand have access to. And I think that they are going to play an enormous role, not only in delivering green infrastructure and providing carbon sequestration and lowering the urban heat island effect that we experience in cities, but they're also, hopefully, if we improve them, they're going to be wonderful places for people to be in. And we know that we've got a potentially really worrying mental health crisis on our hands as well, caused from the stress of this experience. And people are going to need public space to connect with one another and combat social isolation. And I think they have an enormous role in creating safe inclusive cities that people feel a sense of belonging in. And just going back to Christchurch, which is where I was for a few years after the earthquakes, on the opposite end of the spectrum from big shovel-ready projects, there was this enormous change that we saw that was brought about from small community-led projects, and I hope that that isn't overlooked in what the budget gives a boost to. It was sort of pop-up transitional projects in every nook of the city that gave it a sense of life and supported local business and sort of enabled this entrepreneurial spirit and got people back in the city again. And so I really hope that we are funneling resources towards community-led projects all across the country to let people reimagine what their public spaces look like, what their communities look like, and what within their local really serves them. Because I think that our locals are going to be so much more important to us, as we've seen in this experience, in terms of being able to have the amenities and the jobs and the resources that we need close by to us.
I feel as though I've been reimagining what my local area could look like post-COVID already, because all of a sudden there were people milling around in it in the middle of the day, whereas once upon a time it might have only been, a few mums out with their strollers. David, so I actually, while we're talking to you, Tessa, I wonder whether this prompts a rethink from Panuku about urban development, suburban development, because we might well see more people continuing to work from home than might have previously been the case. Everyone's proved to their boss that it can be done.
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps not so much in terms of rethinking, because so much of what Panuku has been trying to do, and as our sort of already existing master plans show, we are trying to enable low carbon communities in Auckland. We want development and healthy homes to be delivered in areas in the city that have capacity for more growth, that are transport orientated, have a richness of amenities around them already, instead of building on the periphery of the city. And we do focus a lot on those community amenities and the role that public realm plays. I think that our challenge is just accelerating what we're trying to do and delivering it faster so that it serves people. Yeah, so I think it hasn't really changed the vision, but I think it's certainly going to lend support to what we are imagining, in that everyone has experienced how brilliant it is to feel safe on the roads or to connect with their neighbours. And to sort of have a more fulfilling sense of civic life than we did before. Yeah, so I think it's more about we've seen in this experience how different things can be, and I hope that we hold on to those, and I hope that it lets organisations like Panuku, like what we're doing, accelerate what we want to deliver.
Thanks, Tessa. David, we've been talking about how we encourage the government and other public bodies to invest and behave differently and think through sustainable outcomes post-COVID. I wonder whether COVID has prompted any kind of rethink for Ngāi Tahu property. And I know it's early days, and I know you're already building green buildings, but what's your state of play?
Look, I think as an entity, Ngāi Tahu property have always looked to consideration of the environmental impact of what we do, simply because of who our shareholders are, who we are as an entity, and the land and the sea and the sky are special things for Māori. So that's imbued in everything we do. A couple of points which I think build on some of the other panelists' comments is that I think what we really want to do is look for clarity around the ends that are being looked for. If there's a particular project or a particular process, we can benchmark or we can sheet it back to something and say, we're doing this because it's needed for something. So what is the need that we are trying to satisfy? And those needs should be relatively simply defined. We need to have a better environment, or we need to have safer, more secure homes, or whatever that is. But so let's identify the need and then say, okay, does this project meet a need? Or is this project meeting a want? And we should clarify the difference between wants and needs. And then it's quite easy, or it's much easier to measure things to say, yep, this is going to create an impact that is positive, that we want because, sorry, that we want because we need it, rather than we want it because we want it, if that makes sense.
Could that be, I suppose, open to being hijacked, that what we need is people back to work, and people might say, well, is it a nice to have greener buildings when what we really need is the economy moving?
Well, I think you have to start with what are the needs, and have those defined, and have them, again, coming back to some of my earlier points, clarity around the needs, and say, okay, this is the need that we're going to serve. I mean, COVID level 1, 2, 3, 4, the need there was to stop people interacting with one another and spreading a deadly virus. So that was a need. People wanted to go and have a beer with their mates or coffee with their friends, but the need was actually higher. And the need was clear and it was articulated. If the need is to get people back to work, then go, okay, we need to get people back to work. How many people will this get back to work? What will they do with their money? How long will they be in the work for? Are they qualified to undertake this work? Are they trained? Are they ready? Are they willing? And then you can say, well, actually, and coming back to Kevin's point earlier, is putting them into that sort of work going to serve a greater need, or is it going to serve a want? And so define the needs that we want. Sorry, mixing up my use of the same words, but define the need. The need is an environmental one. Okay, we measure everything against that. We need to fix the environment. Is this investment going to do that or not? The second thing I was just going to touch on is alignment. And we talk about the Christchurch post-earthquake environment. I think one thing that we could learn from that is that an improvement in alignment between local and central government is something that will help in the process that we have in front of us. At times in Christchurch, alignment wasn't obvious. I'm putting a positive spin on this. And I think that was to the detriment of outcomes. So alignment between the money that's getting spent and directed centrally as well as locally.
I wonder whether I can pick up that point about Christchurch, because while rebuilding from hundreds, if not thousands of earthquakes is very different to rethinking the economy post a pandemic, they both prompt a degree of going back to the drawing board. Did we do things as well as we could have in Christchurch, or are there some lessons from that experience, and David's given us one, that we could apply to the post-pandemic phase? Tessa, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back again to that distinction, or the sort of the difference in outcomes from the enormous anchor projects, the sort of really high investment, high profile projects that are probably similar to our shovel-ready projects now, and those local initiatives, those community empowering initiatives. I think it was you, Kevin, before that said there's a macro and a micro, and I think that balance is really important. I also think Christchurch gave us a signal of what we expect to see in terms of mental health issues, and so I'm concerned about that, and I really hope that resource and effort coming out of this budget is directed towards that. And I found it really eye-opening, just coming back to the sort of the key concerns that my generation has. I read a study late last year that was sort of looking at our perceptions and our key worries across all age groups, but in my age category, the biggest concern was suicide rates. and that is only going to grow as we face a really uncertain future, lack of job opportunity, climate anxiety, all these issues. So I think Christchurch, yeah, I hope now we really invest in our mental health support systems, in looking after people, and put that ahead of fiscal constraints.
Okay, we have a huge number of questions coming in via the question function, and I'm just trying to filter through a few of them to work out where to start. Let's start with this one. Oops, box is a little bit tricky to navigate. There's a question here. This is an anonymous one. Would it help if people were encouraged to view themselves as part of nature rather than somehow above it, e.g. we need nature just as it needs us. Whatever we do affects our global nest, and no species dirties their own nest. That's from Marilyn. So is there a way of encouraging us to see ourselves as part of nature rather than maybe the masters of it? Kevin, have you got some thoughts there?
Oh, it's that classic video conference thing. I was on mute.
Had to happen.
and it was me, yeah. Marilyn makes a really good point. You know, that like it is factually correct that human beings are a species amongst very many. We are part of nature. We are embedded in ecosystems. The surroundings that we have, whether they are natural surroundings or built surroundings, are our habitat. And so actually thinking about our lives and our relationships with other species and with the rest of nature and our built habitat as well, in those terms, is actually really, really helpful. And it's not the way we normally do it, right? So a lot of people have been brought up with the idea that, you know, humans shall have dominion over the other beasts and the rest of nature. And we see time and again, you know, I won't go into it in this webinar, but there's, even with COVID-19, there are ways of thinking about how this pandemic got started that are embedded in an imbalanced relationship between human beings and nature. And in so many ways, nature shows us that if we get that balance wrong, if we think that we are the masters and we can bend nature to our purpose without consequence, which is actually exactly how we have behaved for centuries now, we're in for a comeuppance. You know, so actually thinking with a bit more humility, actually adopting some of Te Ao Māori actually would actually help us to do that, and thinking about that sustainable relationship with the rest of nature. So a very, very strong point, which I agree with completely.
Shamubeel, I wonder if I could bring you in here, because I guess one of the areas where we were concerned about the sustainability of it was tourism, and now we have no international tourists. And I guess that could potentially prompt the rethink, or it could prompt desperation, because this is, depending on the day, our largest or our second largest export earner, and it has evaporated overnight. So how do we get back to the principles of sustainability in this pure New Zealand at the same time as reigniting a sector we relied very heavily on?
Yeah, look, I mean, the conversation was very much about over-tourism only a few weeks ago, right? And all of a sudden, we're now talking about what are we going to do with all these folk that are employed in tourism. And therein lies the challenge about how do you win yourself off an industry that creates jobs and livelihoods, because it is actually really important for people to have dignity in their lives and all those kinds of things. In a way, I think it's helpful in that we have no choice. We don't have the ability to open our border. We don't have the ability to encourage foreign airlines that are going bankrupt to fly to our little country at the end of the world. So that decision has been made for us. A bigger question for us is, what do we then do about reskilling and upskilling our people? What do we do about encouraging new businesses to start? And what sort of industries and what sort of areas will that go in? Personally, I don't think we should take an overly hands-on approach because we won't be very good at it. But just like David said and Kevin said and Tessa said, it's about the values that we apply. Is it about the broad outcome of a sustainable, but something that's local and good for New Zealand and good for New Zealanders? So if we're true to those values, then I think as long as we provide a lot of support, and something that I'd like to see in the budget tomorrow is in fact around business investment and business support. It would be something like being able to expense your investment costs, or accelerated depreciation of investments in things that make your business more sustainable and resilient. Those are the kinds of things that would actually make our businesses pivot to the right direction. So there is no answer for tourism. It's not going to come back anytime soon. We shouldn't try to save something that we have no control over. That is going to happen one way or the other. The more important thing is, can we focus on the people and create opportunities for them and give them the skills that will make them more resilient later on?
Yeah. Sorry, Tessa, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was hoping I could jump in just talking about creating opportunities. And I've been a little bit skeptical around how we're talking about shovel-ready projects and job creation. And I'm curious to know how we're going to actually quantify and prove that we are creating more jobs and not just taking workers from one other project to another big one. And I think that the role of social procurement is going to be really important in those big investments, so that we can actually prove that we are including new workers, so people that were either previously unemployed or have lost their job, in big projects, and having wraparound systems to upskill them. And in particular, I really hope that we direct some of that energy around social procurement to women, because we know that women are disproportionately affected by this crisis because they make up a larger proportion of the tourism industry and the retail sector. And our focus on construction is going to disproportionately support male-dominated roles. So I think it would be really fantastic for us to see social procurement that employs females into roles. It would be even better if they were in green roles that are going to grow and desperately need more expertise. And just going back to the sort of the idea of how we also create different jobs for those that have lost roles in the tourism sector, I have seen some quite cool ideas about employing those individuals who have knowledge, who are active, have skills in project management in some of our conservation efforts. I'm sure, Kevin, you've got some thoughts on that, but I think those sorts of ideas are really exciting.
Kevin, sorry, did you want to respond to that?
I think the point well, in fact, the points that Shamubeel and Tessa both made about this are quite right. Absolutely, you know, we've got jobs that can be done in conservation. You know, we've been spending less than 0.5% of the government's spending on conservation. When you ask New Zealanders how important is nature to you, something like 85 or 90% of people say it's personally very important to me. That's part of their personal identity, but also part of our national identity and our national brand, you know, for whatever it is we end up being able to trade on the world stage in the new normal. So looking after nature is crucial, and there are jobs that could be done if we invested in the sector, from the very basic level of helping plant some trees, you know, through to advanced science jobs. You know, there are employment possibilities right the way through, and we can be deliberate about who those opportunities are made for. You know, here I am on the West Coast. I can tell you that part of the regional conversation going on the coast is, well, you know, we told you that tourism wouldn't work. Well, we need to go back to mining and forestry, you know, and by forestry they mean native logging. What I'm responding with is actually no, there are other ways that we can use this huge natural advantage of our region to create better jobs that are protective or restorative of nature, not extractive and destructive of it.
Already, I guess, we have seen some changes in behaviour that has been forced upon us. You know, no takeaway coffees for some time. For some people that broke the habit, for some people that didn't. There's a question here, though, around disposable plastic bags. Already we've seen some losses in traction around disposable plastic bags, etc. The key is to create a clear vision and strategy to regain those losses and aim beyond. What is the panel's view on what that vision should be? Who wants to kick us off? Tessa, have you got a view on that?
I think our sort of global movement around plastic and how rapidly it became a really important issue for people that we felt we could contribute to. It was almost like our blue planet moment. I think that was quite an amazing example of how we can mobilize around an issue that we can all see is damaging our environment, and an issue that we can all really easily care about and directly engage in with the solution. I think the conversation around waste, that's sort of the starting point, is recycling. You know, that's like the very basic, let's recycle. Before that, it is let's avoid, let's reuse. I think the waste hierarchy is so much more complex than you know, reduce, reuse, recycle. There's so many steps that come before that in terms of resource recovery. And I don't know a huge amount about it, but looking at our sort of country's imports and exports and how the materials that we produce in New Zealand and the materials that we can't get from overseas, how that's going to impact our supply chains, I hope that it causes us to focus more attention on circular economies and being really conscious about our resource use, because we're going to have to, because we can't let anything go to waste, because there comes a cost with that. So I hope that in some way answers the questions or talks to some of those ideas. But yeah, I hope resource recovery, circular economies, and a sort of awareness of how important our resources are will grow, not only with the greater awareness of that link between our prosperity and how we use our resources, but also because some of those constraints with sort of wider world markets is going to force us to.
While we're talking to you, Tessa, there is a question here specifically for you. You touched on Matauranga Māori. How can we ensure Māori are involved in building a greener Aotearoa? And I guess that equally could be a question for David and Ngāi Tahu property.
I think I'll probably come back to that idea of social procurement and actually providing targeted, specific employment opportunities for Māori, so that if they wish, they can take up their role as kaitiaki. That may be in the conservation sector, it may be in the building sector. I think wherever there's an opportunity to specifically offer skills and training and job opportunities for Māori, we've got to. And I care a lot about that issue because the statistics tell us that that Māori will suffer disproportionately as well in this crisis. And from an urban perspective, we've also got to support Māori communities that we know are underserviced and are occupying areas of our country where they don't have good enough access to decent jobs, to sustainable transport, to low carbon, healthy lives that we might have accessible in other areas of the country. So I hope we have, we need to take a really targeted, direct approach to uplift and enable and promote greater prosperity among our Māori communities.
David, did you have some thoughts there too?
Yeah, sure. Just to build on Tessa's comments about social procurement, we have a social procurement component in every business case that we put forward to our board now. So what that means in practical terms is, how can this project help engage local iwi in the outcome? So both in terms of employment directly for us, so we'll engage local iwi to help provide cultural narrative around the sites that we're developing, and provide all of the normal sorts of things like namings and blessings and things like that. But more importantly, a cultural narrative, a hard and soft landscaping consultant program to sort of teach us about what sort of planting we should be doing. And then in terms of direct employment, we will ask anybody who works on our projects, whether they're a building contractor or an architect or a landscape consultant or any sort of person or service provider, when we go through a procurement process, we will ask them what they can do for the local iwi in terms of employment, in terms of apprenticeships or cadetships or that sort of thing. So we will try and link up local iwi with the people that work for us or with us in partnership. So that's something that we do all of the time now. The other areas at a more macro level for Māori is to ensure that their voice is at the table when things like the urban development legislation, which is going through Parliament at the moment, is heard, when a review of the resource management legislation, which is going to be going through in fast order now, just to ensure that the treaty principles are maintained. And that's kind of not giving it lip service, that's actually going and including iwi in the conversations and asking them for their views and opinions, listening to them in a proper way and giving them feedback about why you accept or don't accept it, or why it can or can't be done, so that they're part of the conversation rather than we need to do that. It's a box ticking exercise, and some entities are very, very good at that now.
Yes, and ideally, I'm sure that Māori might have liked to have been more part of the conversation around the rules around tangi as well. Kevin, David just mentioned there the RMA changes, which I believe they're looking at doing for a period of just 2 years and then reverting back to business as usual. But it does change the amount of public input in exchange for greater expediency. So do you have some concerns there, or do you think that the safeguards in place will deliver what we need them to?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I know that the reason government is looking at fast tracking is to enable projects to go faster, create jobs faster, and that's important. Remember, in the background to this, business as usual with the RMA is also changing. That David Parker, as Minister for the Environment, is steering an RMA reform process in the background. So the RMA that we go back to, if assuming that this fast track process runs its full course for the 2 years and then the sunset clause kicks in, it'll be a different RMA that we're using. But what they're planning is for David Parker himself as the minister to decide which projects go into the top end of this process, and then have these 4-person panels chaired by Environment Court judges that will make decisions applying the RMA tests and the kind of normal kinds of things you might expect to see in resource consents. But the input, as you say, is very much more limited. There'll be a specific list of organisations. I guess some will be government organisations, some will be NGOs, probably, well, fingers crossed, including ours. to comment on those, but that normal process whereby the public has a say in that balancing between the benefits of a proposed development and its costs, that's largely gone. So it's just those few organisations that are consulted that will have a say. My concern is that the projects that will be considered for this fast tracking process are the projects, and there's 2,000 of them, roughly speaking, that have gone to the Mark Binns-led committee. Those will be those projects that we've already discussed, the shovel-ready ones that I expect will have a bias towards projects that are hard infrastructure, reflecting old thinking. So those are the kinds of projects that might well end up being poured into this fast tracking process. So we're very much reliant on David Parker as Minister for the Environment applying a test about what should get into the process. And we strongly believe that actually that test should involve environmental bottom lines. So for example, that the project has to be at least neutral in its impact on the environment before it gets into the process, so that the fast tracking process itself also biases towards those projects that lead us towards that sustainability path that we've all said we hope that this time will lead us to.
That all sounds like it's requiring greater RMA reform, which I feel like successive governments have talked about for many terms. I'm going to try and incorporate a few more questions from the floor. There is a direct clash between economic growth and a sustainable future. Is there any way we can shift to an economy that doesn't require growth for stability? That's from Dougal. Shamubeel, did you have some thoughts there? Because I guess we judge the success of our economy and indeed our government based on how well the economy is growing. So do we need to continue to grow it in order for it to be stable, or can we have some kind of new normal?
Yeah, I mean, there is that kind of ongoing conversation, I think, that I've been seeing for the last 10 to 15 years around prosperity versus growth. What is it that we're actually trying to achieve? And that's what Kevin talked about right in his introduction. What's the economy for? We want to make more New Zealanders better off, but what does the better off look like? A lot of the growth that we see is because we overconsume. We do stuff that gives us consumer stuff, but not necessarily satisfaction. So there is this weird kind of tension between the materialism of what the economy has become versus the true purpose of it. Can there be economic success without economic growth? The answer is absolutely yes, but you've got to have the right prices for the right things. So a very economist answer is the reason why we don't value the environment and when we overconsume certain stuff is because they're not priced correctly. If you had to pay the true cost of your pollution in your plastic bag, there is no way you'd be going out and doing your single-use plastics and single-use coffee cups and all those kinds of things. But the current trap, of course, is that we have all aligned ourselves into a system of thinking that requires that growth, because we do rely on that growth to generate that prosperity and the increases in convenience and all those things that we have become used to. So it is a shift that's difficult, but there's a lot of really great work out there that helps us think about this stuff, whether it's the well-being approach that's being pushed forward by the OECD and even in New Zealand, or whether it's the circular economy stuff, or the donut economics from Kate Roth or from Mariana Mazzucato. There's a whole bunch of really amazing thinkers out there who tell us that if we put all the bits of humanity and all the things that we need within the context of our planet, of happiness, equity, fairness, all those things, then our economy looks different in that it's not about growth, but it's about prosperity. Those are quite different things. One is a shorthand for the other, but they don't go the same way. So we think that growth means prosperity, but that's just one way of delivering prosperity. So a very circular way of answering is, yes, there is a different way, but that's not where we are now. And there is a transition that's required that requires a concerted approach that all of us have to buy into. What we started this conversation with today was around values and outcomes that we want. And right now, those values and outcomes are not well articulated. That's one of my big sadnesses about New Zealand, in that we don't know what we mean to be a New Zealander. What is it that defines success? What is it that defines us to be who we are? There are lots of narratives like egalitarianism, which I think are false narratives. We're not an egalitarian country. We have a huge amount of inequality, a huge amount of poverty. We choose not to see it, and we choose not to address it. So in that way, I think everything about the economy, everything about what we choose, the choices that we make, is about what we want to achieve. So a long-winded answer, but I think the answer is yes, there is an alternative, but we're not in that state now. It requires quite a lot of work and quite a lot of re-engineering of our minds and our values to be able to get there.
A question here for Tessa and David. Tips for councils on how to promote green building for council operations when there is internal pushback from property/development teams who are already dealing with inflation of construction costs and a lack of green professionals. How do you change ingrained behaviours and thinking? David, have you got some thoughts there? Oh, we've still got you on mute.
Possibly not the most politically correct way to approach it, but just mandate it.
So just push it through. I guess,
Yeah,
I don't know what level.
Here's the rule, just do it.
And do you think that the construction sector would be in a position to respond?
Well, I think they'll, you know, what happens is that we were talking very earlier on in this conversation about resetting things and taking this opportunity to reset the dial in some respects. Historically, we've had trouble building green buildings and green houses because it cost a bit more and the end user wasn't prepared to pay for it. And I come back then to just what Shamubeel's been talking about, and say, well, you know, what's actually worth paying for and what isn't. So we need to reset the priorities and just say, okay, this is the way it has to be done. That people will find a way to do it.
And David, the benefit, of course, is that the lifetime cost of green buildings is a lot lower than the non-green buildings. So I think there is this weird thing about where we get focused on the cost, but not the value. And this is what economists are always accused of, right? We're very good at knowing the cost of things, but not the value of things. But that's actually accountants, not economists. But there is a challenge in terms of, you know, all the stuff around green buildings, around sustainable buildings, sustainable initiatives, is that over the long run, they are better, both economically and environmentally. But it's the upfront cost that gets in the way. So this cheapness in the way that we approach things is the problem.
And is that a particular challenge at a time when there are huge demands on government funds and private funds for the upfront cost to be higher? Is it a taller order to get them to focus on the long-term benefits when right now it's the how much can councils borrow when their revenue is declining? How much room is there in the government's balance sheet?
I think
that's a question. Sorry, David, that's a question you asked before, and I think any cost-benefit analysis, any evaluation of a project has to take a long view. The things that we're building are going to be here for 50 to 100 years. The benefits shouldn't be measured in weeks and months. They should be measured in the same time frame. Sorry, David.
Yeah, and I think we overlook how adaptable people are and how ingenious New Zealanders are when it comes to solving problems. Who'd have thought that we could cope with what has to occur on a building site now with respect to compliance with health and safety legislation? 5 years ago, 8 years ago, nobody would have thought we could do this. You put a challenge and just say, hey, look, here's a new rule. This is the new rule. People will find a way to do it. As long as it's not a rule, people will find a way not to do it.
I think that question really plainly outlines what Shamubeel was speaking about before as well, in how we measure the success of an economy. And I suppose when we make decisions about major projects, it also comes down to the benefits and what we want to achieve. and financial considerations is one, but the strategic value of them, the economic value for people, the environmental costs associated with those projects have got to be on an equal playing field. I think that there's some really amazing opportunities or sort of examples around the world of how countries are tackling this as well. And I read about a really interesting example from Berlin and Vienna, who are arguably the world leaders in community-led housing. And they've passed legislation that no government land can be sold unless for the purpose of community-led housing. And if any private developer wants to be involved in those projects, they've got to adhere to really strict criteria around social benefits, community empowerment, and environmental sort of the components of that project. And I think the weighting criteria for tender price is like 10% of the whole project, whereas those other benefits are 90%, which is sort of a complete opposite of what we're used to seeing. And I also think that there is an enormous role here for not just cost benefit analysis and taking a long-term view and quantifying these benefits in financial terms, but also using data to set ourselves absolutes, particularly around carbon, in terms of the limits that we cannot go past to achieve our decarbonisation goals. So I think relying heavily on systems like the carbon budget that has been recently released in New Zealand to really get us all talking in the same terms and same language about what is acceptable and what is not.
We've just had one that's more of a comment than a question. The construction sector is ready for low carbon / green building to be mandated. We're waiting, bring it on. So that might be a good place to leave our discussions. We're coming close to our time limit. I just want to, I know that we were potentially at capacity today, and so some people might not have managed to tune in. So just to remind you that we will be putting a recording of this panel on the Green Building Council's website, so that will be available as soon as we can get it edited and uploaded. So please do share it with your friends and continue the discussion. I'd also like to say a very special thank you to each of our panelists. You've been very thought-provoking and very eloquent, and I think we only had 1 or 2 times when we were on mute, which has to be some kind of record for a webinar of this length. So thank you very much to Kevin, to Tessa, Shamubeel, and to David. Thank you for tuning in. Remember that we are all in this together. Hopefully we get some projects that will help us build a better future announced in tomorrow's budget. So thank you for your time this afternoon, and go well as we head into Alert Level 2.